All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Saturday, December 7th, and this is our immediate reaction to the SEC championship game, the first SEC championship game to go into overtime. Texas loses 22-19 to the Georgia Bulldogs, and the first shakeup of the college football playoffs in terms of seeding, and a lot to be determined after this game. Jake and I have not said a word to each other leading up to this. We have no idea what each other is going to say. My initial thoughts are infuriating, frustrating.
Decided before the football game was played.
There was an obvious lopsided advantage in terms of the penalties that were called in that game. Texas missed a lot of opportunities, missed a couple field goals in regulation that wouldn't have never had to go to overtime had those been made. If those sacks wouldn't have been had, if those penalties wouldn't have been called to push those field goals back. Bad decisions, poor decisions by Quinn, I think. Freezes in the red zone. Whatever he has from his own 20-yard line to the opposing 30-yard line is great. Everything from the opposing third line into the red zone, he freezes, makes poor decisions, panics, name the word. I don't know what it is. And I think the play calling late in that game to avoid overtime, that sent it to overtime, and then in overtime, I think Sark has also come to that conclusion as well, because some of those play calls, the 3rd and 15 or whatever it was, the screen pass to Wingo, that's just terrible. To settle for the field goal for Auburn. But Jake, obviously we know that there's some we're going to be talking about officiating, obviously. But in terms of the actual play from the team, I don't think a single wide receiver had a good game aside from Matthew Golden, and Silas Bolden had a couple plays. But the running game was terrible. Offensive line was terrible. Georgia's dominated on that side. Now, the stat sheet will say otherwise. The stat sheet will say Texas dominated this game, and it felt that way for the better part of this game. But really, it came down to Georgia outmuscled Texas and was a tougher football team at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia got some semblance of a running game going in the second half. Of course, it helps when you're allowed to rip guys' jerseys off.
Correct.
While Texas is not able to do anything. But at the end of the day, I did hate that 3rd and 15 call, but at the same time, that call is not the game. Your chances of converting that are so small. I think a lot of people are going to get caught up on that. What sticks out to me is on 1st, 2nd, and 3rd down, Sark finally said, I'm not going to try running it. I'm going to let Quinn run the offense and try to score a touchdown in overtime. And he went for 2 prayers in the end zone with guys wide open underneath that could have got probably at least close to a first down, if not a first down. And then on 3rd down, he has Wingo wide open in the end zone and throws it to the flat on 3rd down when you actually have to get the yardage.
And doesn't even look down the field. Doesn't let the play develop. Just makes his decision pre-snap and just goes with it.
He felt pressure before it happened. And it's something we've talked about being an issue with Quinn. He had moments of brilliance in this game. I thought he was great in the first half. In the second halves, and when games are close, and he hasn't had to deal with many close games in his career and many moments where you have to drive down the field to win the game, he just has never had to do that much in his career. And he did not. I saw some complaints about the play calling on those final set of downs, and I'm like, the plays are there to be made. Guys are open. He just threw 2 end zone shots that both had no shot for the receiver to catch because they weren't thrown well enough. And then he checked it off whenever he had a guy wide open in the end zone for a touchdown. And that's your ball game. As soon as that happened, you kind of knew Georgia was going to go down and score because they had been starting to run the ball better.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. And, look at Georgia. Also, kicking a
field goal in overtime was you admitting defeat.
Yeah, but you weren't going to go for it there at the same time.
No, you couldn't. No.
And I mean, Georgia winning both coin tosses is kind of reminiscent of how this game went as well. I mean, every bounce went their way. They
Three
fumbled it
fumbles.
twice
They
on
had
that one drive.
one drive. They fumbled it twice, recovered their own fumble, and then there was a strip sack from Colin Simmons on the opposite hash mark of the field, and the ball flies out of bounds, bounces 20 yards, and goes out of bounds, and they settle for a punt. The game just went Georgia's way a lot of the time. And even when Texas felt like they were dominating and not converting anything into points, I started feeling this disgusting gut feeling down in the pit of my stomach of this isn't going to end well.
When it was 6-3 at half, with Texas having over 200 more yards than Georgia, but also having more penalty yards than Georgia had total yards.
Yeah.
I had a pretty good feeling which way this game was going. I did predict Georgia to win. So I just, college football history has a way of repeating itself in many ways. And for a long time, Georgia couldn't get over Alabama. The refs would always favor Alabama. Bama would have a QB change or a QB get hurt. Someone else would come in and play just well enough to win. It'd always be something going Bama's way, and Georgia couldn't get past them, right? And Georgia fans wanted Kirby Smart fired because they couldn't beat Bama until it happened and it changed. And now Georgia's getting that treatment. And Texas is going to have to find a way, if they want to win an SEC title eventually, to get over this Georgia hurdle, because clearly there is a mental disconnect for the offensive line for when they play anyone else compared to Georgia. And don't tell me it's a strength of schedule thing. Georgia's defense has not done this to anyone else. I mean, UMass scored more points than Texas did in both games. And the offensive line got whipped. They could not run the ball. And Sark tried to stick to the run. He tried to be able to run the ball, because if you're just throwing it, that's when Quinn gets, the pass rush, and then he has no chance. He just sacks himself or just runs and throws a prayer ball or throws it out of bounds. And that's kind of the story of this game for me. The offensive line did not get their revenge game. The defense was really good until those last couple of drives where they did let them drive down the field with the backup quarterback. Again, it helps when you can do this to a defensive lineman and it not get called, while Texas gets called for just ticky-tack holdings on the other side. But it is what it is. Bama got that treatment for years. Georgia will now. I'm sure Georgia fans will be in our comments again. Well, they said it was going to be an ass kicking again. It definitely wasn't, and it took officials saving your ass to do it.
Yeah, and well, Texas actually did the ass kicking for the majority of this game. And they're not going to like me saying that. They're going to disagree with that. There's the
Stat
defense
sheet speaks for itself.
And the stat sheet, the box score speaks for itself. The penalty. What was the it was over 100 yards of penalties for
it was
Texas.
just under 111 for 94. Granted,
94.
It really is more than 100, because anytime Georgia did get a call for a penalty in the first half and until the final parts of the fourth quarter, there was always an offsetting call just made up out of thin air.
Jake, 141 rushing yards to 31.
Offensive line got whipped. They did not get there was only a couple runs here or there where they got anything going. They tried running to the perimeter. They tried running up the gut. They tried doing misdirection. None of it worked, because it doesn't really matter what your run design is when it is a stalemate or just flat out a guys in the backfield when the running back touches the ball.
When Georgia stunts, it feels like the Hayden Connors, the Cam Williamses, and the Jake Majors cannot keep up. They struggle. They struggle on the stunt. If Trayvon Walker is starting on an end and he's going to end up pressuring and applying his pass rush to Jake Majors, it's almost like there's just whatever type of communication or football IQ between the offensive line, it just disappears. They have no idea. I mean, Michael Williams, again, just destroyed him. 7 sacks again, back-to-back, both times, both games. In fact, they may have had more. Did they have 7, I believe? But it was the same story from the defensive line. 6.
Which I think is what they had last time.
I think they had 7. I think they had 7 sacks first game and 6 this game. But it doesn't matter. Apples to oranges, whatever. I mean, that's what's frustrating is it was almost the exact same story up front, except for the offense had a better passing game. And then the one time the wide receivers failed to make plays all season long, it came in this game with drop passes and missed opportunities down the field. And then Quinn, when it came down to crunch time, he just closed his eyes and launched a prayer ball and had a hope and a prayer that someone was going to come down with it. And something you and I talked about, it's not even jump balls. If he was giving the guys jump balls, that would be one thing. They're just 5-6 yards away from the receiver or short or
short. They got bailed out and it was pass interference. So I'd not necessarily bailed out, but give Wingo a shot. And that's one thing that is it's just not going to be like that next year. We've seen Arch throw deep balls. The receiver almost always has a shot at the very least. That's something I think we both look forward to. And I've criticized Quinn. I've given Quinn credit. I gave him a lot of credit this past week. But the games like this is why I don't think they're going to win a championship this year, and why I look forward to the change of era. I appreciate everything Quinn has done for this program. He is going to go out a winner. But at the end of the day, in some of these big moments against really good defenses, when it's a close game, he comes up short. And that's what happened in this game. Texas had a clear quarterback advantage in this game, and it has nothing to do with Beck going out. Beck going out helped Georgia because Beck's terrible against Texas. He can't do anything. If he stays in, Texas wins this game in regulation because they don't get that burst of energy and kind of change of pace to start the third quarter that threw the defense out of whack.
Yeah, and apparently we had not that there was much to scout on for Stockton, but apparently we didn't realize that he could use his legs to that ability. And there was no QB spy. There was no contain on the quarterback whenever he was in the game. Bit very hard on every play action, committed fully to the running back. All they had to do was him keep it. And, he was guaranteed to get 5, 6, 7 yards a pop. Took a big hit at the end of the game. Glad it wasn't called targeting. And I hope he is okay. Right. And I'm glad he's okay, or I hope he's okay. But man, there's a kryptonite for the Texas Longhorns, and they wear red and black, and they've got a G on their helmet. And a lot of it is, I believe, just mental mistakes. A lot of the issues, Jake, were mental mistakes. Whether some of the penalties were real or fake, whatever they were, a lot of them were mental issues that Texas couldn't overcome.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say that this game's over at halftime, if not for officiating. It just, at the second half, the officiating wasn't as blatant of a.
I mean, Sark had to say something at half. Jake,
what's your thoughts on that? I've never heard him say anything about officials. Maybe after the Oklahoma State game several years ago, but I don't even think he did then. I'd have to go
we were
back.
A bad football team.
But that's the first time I've ever seen him that angry at officiating. He had every right to be, because without the officiating, that game it's over. It's over at halftime. They had 257 yards a half or something like that to Georgia's 56. They had 90 yards of penalties or something like that. I think it was 80 something yards of penalties at halftime. That made a difference in this game, and you can call it cope, whatever. It's cope. That's fine. If it went the other way, you would be hearing it from the Georgia side, because we've seen them do that when it was biased towards Alabama back when they were trying to beat Alabama.
Yeah. And the rest of the nation saw it as well. Jake, I had a question. I'm trying to remember what it was. But what do you think that this does this game feel like, if Texas loses in round one of the playoffs, is this a little bit of not a failed season? I won't call it a failed season, but a disappointment.
I don't think they're going to lose in round one of the playoffs, to be honest. But yeah, losing in the first round, they're going to have a home game.
Yeah.
It'd be a huge disappointment. They're going to be favored against whoever they play in the first round.
Even if it's Bama?
To God they don't.
Yeah.
Why would I think that offense is going to beat? And they could. Milroe could play out of his mind. You never know what you're going to get with Bama. but I'm saying I would favor Texas to win that game 80%, 8 out of 10 times.
I remembered my question. Was the defensive performance in the second half? I know the offense wasn't doing much, but the end of the second half, and I know they got the interception, which could have been returned for a touchdown if Gilbo just halfway pays attention and throws a halfway decent block, or if Jahdae Barron cuts it to the inside, then it's a pick six and game over. Texas wins. But do you think that the Texas performance in that second half with the backup quarterback and then also allowing the touchdown score in overtime, were you expecting them to step up like I was? I kind of felt like why can't we get a stop right here? What's happening?
Well, on one of those drives, they did get a stop, and for some reason, even though their punter was hurt, and they weren't ready for a fake punt, which that's a Jeff Banks thing, and the special teams has been a disappointment because credit to Bert Auburn for getting them to overtime, I guess, and make it. But if he just makes his kicks in regulation, it never goes to overtime, and the punting again was terrible, and then you give up the fake punt. Really, the only positive from special teams was Silas Polden actually had a really good return that turned into nothing.
Two trick plays in these games with Texas and Georgia. You had the flea flicker in Austin that elevated them to get that big drive, that touchdown scoring drive that almost iced it in the middle of the third quarter, and then this fake punt. And it was a great call, ballsy call by Kirby Smart. Kudos to you. Pulled it off. It worked. But, man, like you said, you've got a punter that's hurt and you're not expecting some sort of something. I thought they were going to go. I thought they were just going to flat out go for it. I never thought they were actually going to punt it. I thought they were just going to go for it.
I thought they were going to punt it there because they were on their own 30 or 35-yard line.
But you know, with a backup punter or, you know, lack of a punter or whoever you've got back there filling in.
To be fair, Texas lacks a punter and they still elect to punt it.
That's also true. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'd say that first drive of the second half was disappointing. Namely just because they didn't get a fourth down stop there, but that's one touchdown drive.
Yeah.
I mean, Georgia failed to get over 300 yards of offense again. It had nothing to do with Carson Beck going out. That didn't hurt them. Also, when you're playing against a Georgia or a Texas or a whoever, when the starting quarterback goes down, it's not like the NFL. You just have another 5-star coming in. Like, you have a guy that is very talented coming in. This isn't the NFL. You don't have Cooper Rush coming in. You don't have whoever the heck the Dolphins backups were coming in. You have a 5-star dude who's supposed to go to the NFL coming in.
Yeah.
So I can't put any blame on the defense other than that overtime drive was very disappointing because to me, if the offense gets a field goal, it should be going to the next overtime if the defense is the number one defense in the country and a championship defense because it was a championship game. And instead, they weren't ready for a quarterback draw on 2nd and 10.
They didn't make the stops when they needed to. And that's kind of my point on it. It's not the fact that Georgia was able to drive down the field. It's not this, it's not that. It's making the stops when you needed to make a stop. And then you knew that it was going to be a handoff with Carson Beck being in the game. They lined up an I formation. They have a wide receiver on the field. And you got blown off the ball, off the line of scrimmage on the 5-yard line. And Trevor Etienne just had to basically bulldoze through a secondary defensive back to get into the end zone.
Oh, yeah. As soon as Beck came out, you knew they were scoring on that play.
Right. But you also knew what they were going to run.
Yeah.
And that's what's frustrating is that the defense knew what they were going to run and they still got blown off the line of scrimmage. And so, Jake, I think there are some, I don't know if it's a Georgia thing. We haven't seen this Texas team lose to anybody but Georgia this year, but losing twice in one season, first time that's happened, I believe, since the 1940s or something like that. Texas A&M beat Texas twice in one season a long, long time ago. But yeah, this is the first time Texas has experienced that. First time the SEC championship game has ever gone into overtime. Texas just part of history tonight. Not
first
necessarily
time it's a rematch too. It has to be because it's there.
Yeah. So very interesting. Jake, what's your feeling? I know this will probably change by the time we come out with our Tuesdays episode feeling moving forward, going into the playoffs. We did kind of preface this game with saying, look, it's not a win or go home. Technically it was, or it was a lose and go home situation, technically, because we do and are now going to be hosting a home playoff game, but season's still very much alive. It just feels disappointing. We talked about it maybe, I don't know, first week of this podcast, talking about the college football playoffs, and it's advantageous to maybe miss your conference championship game, get this rest going into the college football playoffs, than to make your conference championship game and lose. We are now in a spot to where Texas, what could possibly be in what you and I deemed as worst case scenario going into the college football playoffs. Your mic's unplugged. You're muted or something. But in my opinion, that still holds true. No, still nothing. But that still holds true for me, is whether or not that the Texas Longhorns.
Hello?
Yep, there we
we
go.
go. Okay.
But for me, I still think that you might have an advantage if you're Notre Dame. You might have an advantage if you're Ohio State. You might have an advantage if you're not playing in one of these conference championship games. You're going to be hosting a playoff game, but you didn't have the wear and tear of playing this extra game. Now, if you win this game, I think it's advantageous. You get a bye week. You're in the second round of the college football playoffs. You don't have to play round one. Sure, that's a great advantage to have. But losing this game seems to hurt a team more than not making the conference championship.
Yeah, I mean, it just does. Because like you said, you're literally playing an extra game that everyone else doesn't have to play. And what I'm curious to see is, where does Texas get seeded? If they get seeded as the 5 seed, I said this I hinted at it during the week that it almost feel better going into the playoff as far as how far they're going to go, than if they would win it and be like a 2 seed with how the bracket was looking to shake
Texas
out.
took Georgia to overtime. It's not like they got blown out. It's not like they had a poor performance.
And the committee, I'm guessing they're going to keep Notre Dame, but I'm very curious to see what they're going to do, because they said they wouldn't punish teams for losing their conference title games. Well, Texas is number 2 in the country currently. Notre Dame's 4. So there's a decision to be had there for the committee. I think they're going to likely end up at 6. I don't see them falling past 6, quite honestly, just looking at the rankings on my other monitor here from what they were last week. But that's kind of the big question for me going forward, is, are they the 5 or are they the 6? Because I think the 5 is just much better, because with the 6, you're probably playing Alabama as opposed to in Arizona State,
or Arizona State or a Clemson, depending on who's going to have, whether Clemson wins this ACC championship game, or if Arizona State's going to hold on to that 12 spot with SMU winning tonight.
But when I look at the playoffs, and you're coming off a loss, so everything's negative in your mind. But I mean, I can pretty much tell you how I feel right away. I would favor Texas against every single team that's not named Georgia or Oregon.
Yeah, I'm not sold on Ohio State. That's a tough one. But yeah, I mean, really, other than that, I'm interested to see how Tennessee fares in the college football playoffs. I think that they could be a dark horse that no one is really kind of,
if their offense gets going, because they have a better quarterback than Texas does right now. They do.
The way Nico is playing is better than how Quinn Ewers is playing.
Yeah, Nico's been playing better in a stretch. Also, this was Nico's first full season starting, so you're allowed to go through those rough stretches he went through at the start and middle of the season. But he's improved. Quinn isn't. He's in year 3. This is a game where Quinn had to go win it. The rushing game wasn't there, and you have your guy in your 3rd year that with the way he was playing the first few games of the year, you thought was going to be a top 10 draft pick at worst. And now it feels like he's going to be a top 5 round draft pick at best. Yeah. I mean, that's the level he's played, because even
in big moments, in the biggest moments, Quinn has played his worst football. He's cowered it down. He has shrunk in the big moments. The moments have just shadowed him and swarmed him whether that be through confidence, whether that be through panicking, cowardly plays, and just when he needed to hit the check down, he had Jaden Blue wide open on a check down I think it was on first down.
His first.
On the first down play, if he had just let the play develop, all he had to do was just a quick little dump down pass to Jaden Blue, and Jaden Blue at minimum has 9 yards, a minimum 9-yard play to get him down to 2nd and 1, if not a first down, if not a touchdown on that play. But then he missed him. And then a couple plays later, you got on 3rd down and whatever it was, I think 3rd and 10 or whatever, it was you had Ryan Wingo breaking free, just wide open into the end zone. No one's going to touch him. And then you want to check it down to a safety who's just making a beeline down to the running back and makes a stop. So, like, he's not letting plays progress. He's not allowing things to develop down the field because he's feeling pressure that isn't there in those big moments. And he's putting pressure on himself in those moments than when the pressure isn't there. And I don't know if it's the moment of the game pressure or if it's actual pressure from the defense, but either way, he had time to make a play and he didn't do it.
Yeah. He hasn't put together a full game this year, really.
Not one.
Not against a good opponent, because Michigan, he didn't have to in the second half, to be fair. Like, they just didn't throw the football.
Right.
They just ran the ball, ran down the time. But A&M, he was so good in the first half. Then the second half, he cost them. The Kentucky game, that 3rd quarter, and I know he was hurt going, but there's always something, right? And like against Oklahoma,
right?
He was terrible whole game.
It's always something. That's it.
I mean, he was better this time than last time against Georgia, but better isn't winning football when you're talking about comparing a just atrocious full game to half of a decent game. I mean, that first pick wasn't his fault. That was Jake, just a piss poor effort which, by the way, Isaiah Bond could not touch the playoffs or not touch the field in the playoffs, and I just wouldn't care at this point.
Yeah. Jake, we had expectations. Again, expectations I always feel like are on a personal level. That's an internal thing that you set within yourself as a fan or as a coach or as a player or whoever. But I think there were pretty good expectations that Quinn Ewers was supposed to be a Heisman candidate this season. And he was supposed to be a possible first-round pick in this upcoming draft. And he was supposed to be and be if not the best quarterback in the country, one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the country this year. Is there a moment at all this season, like in terms of after the game, where we were like, that was a Heisman caliber moment? That was a top 5 draft pick moment from Quinn, or game that he had as a full performance. I can't go down the season
Michigan,
and think of just one.
Michigan.
But again, yeah. So,
but he didn't have a moment. Texas didn't have very many close games this year. A lot of their drives that were like the big moments for the offense were drives where they just ran the football down the other team's throat.
Yeah.
He had multiple chances for those moments this game, and it didn't happen. On that drive where they kicked the field goal to tie it to go into overtime, that was a chance for a moment. It didn't happen. He didn't give his, again, my biggest complaint with Quinn has always been he doesn't give the wide receivers a chance. He misses the deep balls either short or way long, and there's never a chance for a jump ball. I think that jump ball catch by Golden in the first half, that might have been the first like crazy jump ball catch we've seen this year, because it's the first one of the few times where there's been an opportunity for the wide receiver to do that. And, I would have liked to seen the arch package more often when they were getting into scoring position, because you can throw it out of that. They only ran one play of it. And with how Quinn was playing, especially when the field gets condensed, he panics. That is just a proven fact at this point.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if in the playoff game you see Arch out there when the field starts getting condensed.
I'd like to see within the 30-yard line, I'd like to see an Arch package regularly. I mean, even if it's consecutive plays, even if it's you hit the 30-yard line and Arch takes over either until you score a touchdown or you kick a field goal. I'm not against it at this point. Like this is a moment when Nick Saban says, all right, Jalen Hurts, you're out of the game. Tua, you're in the national championship. It just is. It's time to win it, and if your quarterback is the only thing holding you back from achieving said goal, you've got to make a change, and I don't care when it is. And that would have probably hurt Nick Saban's legacy so much had they lost that game. But the fact that they turn it around and they win it with a freshman, with Tua, in a national championship game, that almost cemented him as being, you are the greatest college football coach of all time. And Sark has a decision to make at the quarterback position, regardless of where we are at in the season. And he still has a couple of games, hopefully, to figure that out.
Yeah, especially he's not going to make a change and just make Arch the starter.
Correct.
But I think what we're saying, just to clarify for anyone listening, is when that field gets condensed, when you get inside that 30-yard line, I'd be throwing the Arch package out there regularly at this point, because Quinn is, when they cannot just hand off the football and run it, they are a bad red zone team. And that has been a consistent theme Quinn's entire career, is they either run the football well and then they score in the red zone, or they don't score a touchdown in the red zone because they just can't pass it in the red zone.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Jake, anything else before we wrap this up?
Clemson is currently rolling SMU, so that will be interesting. At this point, I think we're rooting for Clemson.
Yes.
Because I would rather see Alabama not in the playoff. And I do think if Clemson wins, I know I disagreed with you last week, but after I stepped back and looked at it, I was like,
SMU has to put on a performance. I think if SMU gets absolutely rolled in this game, I would not be surprised if they decided to make SMU the 12th ranked team and have them out of the playoffs.
If they did that,
I wouldn't be surprised. I would disagree, but I would not be surprised.
And I said that as well last week, but I'm just saying right now, if you did that, you have to abolish the committee immediately at that point, because they're at that point, they set their own criteria and they say, we're not going to punish teams for losing in the conference championship. Kicking an 11-1 SMU team out of the playoff to put in a 9-3 Bama team who got destroyed by some bad teams. That is a clear
bias,
just heist by the committee to put in a team because of a brand name.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. We'll have a lot to talk about next week, and we'll have a lot to talk about for these next couple weeks, as it'll be 2 weeks from now. We'll see a game in DKR.
Yep. So this is not the end of the Texas football season. Now, it might feel not great. We might be down in the dumps right now, and that's perfectly fine. You're supposed to feel that way after a loss. I think this Texas team is going to be highly motivated. We will, see come Tuesday what the final college football playoffs will look like. Moving ahead, teams will start preparing for their games. But, Jake, Texas will have a little bit of rest before the next college football game, and so hopefully they'll be able to kind of rest, kind of hit the reset button, come up with something. They'll know their opponent before time, and they'll come up with a good game plan.
Kelvin Banks get healthy. Gooseby was very good. Again, Gooseby had one of the better perform. The left side of the offensive line was fine.
It was the right side that
it was once
terrible.
Again the right side that cost them.
Yep. So that's going to do it for today's episode. Georgia wins the SEC championship. They are SEC champions over the Texas Longhorns 22-19. I'm Tanner Carlson. That's Jake Jimerson. This is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. And as always, we hope you like, share, subscribe. We come out with these episodes Tuesday through Friday, dropping at noon, and we give you our immediate reaction, which is exactly what we're doing right after the games on Saturday. Well, transfer portal news will be coming out here pretty soon. We got a busy couple of weeks ahead of us as we prepare for the Texas Longhorns first round college football playoff game in the first ever 12-team playoff. With all that being said, hook 'em.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.